Jazz Tangcay, Senior Artisans Editor at Variety, and very excited to be here. I'm your host for today's Half Hour with Obi-Wan Kenobi. With us, we have director and showrunner Deborah Chow. Deborah has worked extensively in film and television. She's directed The Mandalorian, Mr. Robot, Jessica Jones, and American Gods. She's won an NAACP Image Award for Better Call Saul and was honored with the DGC Visionary Award. Earlier this year, she was nominated for a Directors Guild Award for Outstanding Directorial Achievement for Obi-Wan Kenobi, and that's what we're going to talk about today, the Emmy-nominated series Obi-Wan Kenobi for Lucasfilm. And Deborah directed all 6 episodes of the limited series, so let's take a look.
They're coming. Stay hidden, or we will not survive.
Leave us alone.
When the time comes, he must be trained.
Like you trained his father? You still want Kenobi. He's gone.
Maybe you've been looking in the wrong places. I want every lowlife and bounty hunter to squeeze him. You can't run, Obi-Wan! You can't escape him!
Wow. So Obi-Wan Kenobi follows, the title character who is such a part of this, integral part of this universe. I'm going to ask you the obvious, Deborah. How much of a Star Wars fan were you before even, going into The Mandalorian and then Obi-Wan?
I was definitely a fan. I wasn't, like a crazy fan, but I was a pretty big fan. And that for me, I was a huge sort of fantasy and sci-fi person. I was a goth kid and I loved everything to do with comic books or sort of fantasy worlds. So Star Wars was kind of the mothership in that world for me.
How much did directing, episodes of The Mandalorian help you working with Lucasfilm, working with, ILM and just this fandom?
It was pivotal. Like it was absolutely essential, I think, on so many levels. The first was just Star Wars itself and just getting sort of the training for it and getting to work with someone like Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau on the first season and just kind of absorbing the Force and, what Star Wars is about. But then also the technology was huge for us because, we obviously started stagecraft on Mandalorian in the first season, and this was also a stagecraft show. So, to be able to, for me, by the time I got to Obi-Wan, I was already looking to like, how can I push this technology and how can I, go further with it, which, I could not have done if I'd not already had a year on Mandalorian with it. And then just sort of the practical reality of what it's like to shoot Star Wars. Like you don't, how does a Jawa move? Like how does a stormtrooper move? And like those things seem so easy and they're really not sometimes. So, I was very fortunate that I'd had that year already because by the time I came into Obi-Wan, I already had sort of the vocabulary and the grounding, so I didn't have to worry about it.
What's so great about this series is it's such a character-driven story. We get, the backstory of young Leia, but also Obi and everything that happens. What was that like for you as a director to be able to, work on this and flesh out this kind of like jigsaw puzzle in the larger puzzle?
I think that was definitely the most challenging aspect, and it's what made it amazing, but it's also what made it incredibly difficult, especially in terms of developing the story. Because obviously we're taking these 2 iconic, huge characters and we're right in the middle between two trilogies, and everybody kind of knows what happens before and after. So that was the challenge of that. And also, there's obviously a very passionate fan base who has a lot of thoughts on what everybody's doing as well. But at the same time, you are working with these humongous legacy characters, and you're getting into it. And for us, like when I first came, the project had been in development for many years when I came onto it. But what excited me was actually that it was a character, it was character driven, and it was really getting into Obi-Wan, and the idea of getting to do that with someone like Ewan, who really can do it on such an incredible level. But when we started getting into it, if you kind of look at Order 66 and everything that happened at the end of Revenge of the Sith, it's very strong character work that's going on there. Like it's a huge, every single character's destiny in life was changed on that night, literally. So there was a lot to work from.
Ultimately, that finale is so emotional, right? You've got two of the biggest characters in the universe. All roads in this in this series lead to that moment. Like, talk about getting there along the way.
That finale, I mean, obviously, that's the heart of the show. Everything was driving towards, so many of those moments that happen in episode 6. But, the pivotal one was really the cracked mask and sort of the moment with Hayden and Ewan. So we knew the whole time, that is essentially the core of the show. That's the heart of the show. So for me, I think some of the stuff I enjoy the most as a director is I love doing action, and I kind of like doing these big characters like the Mandalorian, or like that feel very masculine and whatnot. But I like also really pulling the emotion out of it at the same time. So it was kind of a great balance of kind of taking these big characters, but then trying to really drive it by their relationship, which frankly, in the trajectory of the trilogies and all the work that George set out, was a very emotional relationship to start with. So we just tried to continue it as honestly as we could for him.
Let's pull up the clip, because I really want to dive into a lot of aspects that we see here.
Sure.
Anakin.
Anakin's gone. I am what remains.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Anakin. For all of it.
I am not your failure, Obi-Wan. You didn't kill Anakin Skywalker. I did. The same way, I will destroy you.
then my friend is truly dead. Goodbye, Darth.
Obi-Wan!
Oh my gosh, so many things to unpack there. Starting, let's start with the fight because, when you're watching that for a moment, you think Anakin, Darth Vader has the upper hand and maybe he's going to win, even though we know what's going to happen. How did you, what were the conversations you had about choreographing that so that, we go on this journey for this moment and maybe he does get the upper hand and then doesn't, but yeah.
That was something we started working on that early, because also, Ewan did like 98% of that work. So he needed to, we needed to learn it. So we had to kind of have it dialed in pretty early. So I worked with a great stunt coordinator, Jojo Asubio, and essentially I wanted the fight to be, it's essentially between these two huge iconic characters that are in many ways equally matched. And we've never kind of seen them in their prime meeting up like this. So, and they have so much backstory, obviously, coming into this, and there's so many issues going on with the two of them. So I really wanted to drive it it's driven by these two guys, and it's driven by the dynamic between the two of them. So we almost essentially broke it down into like almost a 5-act structure of how it would work, about how each piece of like, who's got the upper hand here, and then where does it turn, and then the other one has it. And, for me, I think we always felt like that they would, if they were just left to their own devices and they just fought to the death, they are essentially fairly equally matched. And so we were sort of showing that and kind of having that arc of where it changes is when you get into the character, that it's not so much the physical prowess. So it was a really interesting fight, though, to develop and to choreograph, because it's not a normal fight. Nobody can win, and nobody can die. The audience kind of knows that they're both obviously going to survive and what's going to happen to them. And we knew that we were building to the cracked mask scene, which is a very big U-turn in the middle of a big epic fight. So it was really interesting. I've never designed anything like it, and it was really, really a pretty fantastic experience to get to do it.
Let's talk about the editing of that and how that all came together, because that, you've got the famous lightsaber sounds, but then you also have this incredible score by John Williams. I mean, talk about your reaction when you heard John Williams was going to be doing the score, and then putting that all in there so that it's not it's not drowning that out, but then you've got these incredible layers of sound and in the cinematography of it all. Like, that's a lot in there.
Yeah, there's definitely there's a lot going on. And I have certainly found that from all the other things I've ever worked on. Star Wars, like in any given scene, there's like 5 or 6 gags going on. There's like a million, there's so many pieces to it. It's so detailed. But the music aspect of it, like, frankly, I was kind of, we were so lucky, honestly, to get John Williams to do that theme song and to come in to do it. And, it's Star Wars and music and sound design. It's huge. You know what I mean? Like, you think of how they've defined, like, just even the droid sounds, and it's very difficult. And also, we're working with characters that are coming straight out of Legacy, so there's a sound and there's music that's associated with them. But it was interesting because at the same time, we are also doing them in a different point of their lives. So, we don't want to start taking like a New Hope and going, that's full Vader, like in a very different period of his life. So it doesn't really make sense for us to be doing like copying kind of what they did. So it was trying to find the balance of like, we need to, this needs to feel like it's in continuity musically with the, everything else that's been done, and it's these characters, but it also needs to feel correct for this time in their lives, and that, that this is this moment is a different moment than we've seen before.
Yeah. Well, to that, like, what's so great is there are like, it's not just Obi's story. As I said at the beginning, we get young Leia and we see her with her adoptive parents, and Vivian is such an incredible young actress. Like, what was that like for you to take this and put your own stamp on it and be able to tell, like, give us a little insight into what happened to Leia after the end?
I think, in many ways, like I would have moments where, it is obviously quite daunting to take on material like this, but at the same time, I'd have a day on set where you're like, how did I, you're standing next to Darth Vader directing, and you're like, how did this happen? Like, how did I end up directing Vader? I don't know. So it was incredible, but at the same time, it's like, wow, you've got the whole legacy of this and all these characters. The Leia storyline, and I think, with Vivian, like that was a tall order, like trying to cast and for her to perform not only a young Princess Leia, but a young Carrie Fisher, to, one of the most iconic female characters and one of the most iconic women that have kind of existed. So, we did look all over the world, and it was a long search. And I was really just kind of looking for a kid that sort of embodied naturally the characteristics. And then I was lucky enough to find Vivian. And the biggest thing that we were trying to do is to just not try to mimic Carrie or try to copy her, but to just let it be its own, like, just have her react as like a normal kid and try to forget the Princess Leia of it all. So that's essentially what we were trying to do through the show.
Yeah. I loved the costumes, and the little Easter eggs in the costumes designed by Suture at Lara Lab. What was it like working with her and this collaboration between director and costume designer?
She is the absolute best. I mean, she is hands down the best costume designer I've ever worked with. She's the loveliest person and like a true artist. So I was so fortunate to have her because she approaches costumes in a way that it's not just about the costumes, but she, with Star Wars is so interesting, right? Because you're getting into what planet are they from, and how does this planet dress, and like how does the so she would really kind of get into that and get into like the anthropology behind like how did this, why do they dress like this, and we're creating new worlds. And then she's just designed so many beautiful things, like trying to do Alderaan, where we're looking at the iconic, like, okay, Carrie's going to come and Princess Leia is going to be this by the time she's in A New Hope. So what's the young version of that? How do we start to show that formation? And, you see the influence of her mother, see the influence of Tala. So, she was to have somebody like that who was really trying to take on the legacy, but then also sort of, bring her own invention to it. I was so fortunate to have her.
Yeah. Was there a scene that you're like, Jazz, this scene took so long for us to navigate and put together? Like, what was that scene for you?
There's probably a few that took a bit. I would say kind of actually the biggest challenge was COVID in the middle of all of this, like this whole thing really went through COVID. So that was the trickiest part of it. But I think probably in large part it was anything that had a lot of background and stuff would get very complicated. And I think a lot of that was because of COVID and whatnot. That would just get tricky to do that, and it's difficult in a scenario like that. But for the most part, we shot in Los Angeles, and so we had a lot of the Mandalorian. They were right across the studio set from us, so we had a lot of support around this.
Hayden Christensen wasn't attached initially. Like, at what point did you learn he was going to come on and play Anakin, Darth Vader?
When I came on, it was still obviously in script development stage. So, I mean, there is no show without you. And so, Ewan was obviously, he's a creative partner and producer on the show, but there is nothing without him. So he had to be there. But beyond that, there was no casting, like nothing had been, it was still very much in development. So I think for me, I felt very strongly that Hayden needed to be in this and to be obviously part of this. And obviously we were building to this big moment with him, but we're very much connected to the prequels in this and that relationship coming out of Revenge of the Sith. So it felt like it just felt part and parcel that he had to be sort of part of this, because that's what is weighing on Obi-Wan, is him. So so I actually, you know, and obviously we're both from Toronto, we're both Canadian. So the first time I went back, and it was like winter in Canada, and I drove up to his farm and kind of went and talked to him about it, about coming back to play the role.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I love that. So I'm gonna go back to the fight scene for a second. How long did that take you to like put to, you know, to actually film and put together? Like, I know it's a couple of minutes, but time-wise, it's always interesting to learn that story.
I'm trying to remember. I do know that I could have used probably about three times the amount of time that I had, which, you know, as it is always. But I feel like it was at least, I don't know, because when you put in some second unit, put it bits and bobs, so it was probably around a week and a half, maybe.
Yeah.
Of shooting. But you know, the biggest thing that allowed us to actually do it on a TV schedule and budget was the fact that Ewan McGregor did it. Like, you know, he did all the stunt work. So I didn't have to keep switching out people. We could do a full take of the sections, and it's him. So, I mean, he's what made that possible and made that in so many ways.
So, Deborah, final question. In case somebody hasn't had the chance to watch Obi-Wan Kenobi, is there something or one thing about the series that stands out for you that would make someone, you know, watch the show?
You know, I think for anyone, I mean, I would think probably most Star Wars fans have probably seen it at this point, but I think, you know, I think one of the things we were really trying to do with the show is have it be emotional and have it be human. So even if you don't know the entire, you know, every bit of the canon of Star Wars, at the end of the day, it is a pretty human story, and it's, you know, it's about people. So I think, you know, it doesn't require that you know everything or know every Easter egg. It hopefully it will just function on the level of storytelling of just people and emotions.
Yeah. Okay, since you mentioned the Easter egg, what was your favorite Easter egg to put in?
I have to say I really loved the clone flashback. You know, the clone vet, when he, you know, he's begging for change, because there's something so poignant. Like, so it's so sad, but it's also so amazing. And then we actually managed to, it somehow circuitously managed to work out that they were shooting Boba Fett at the same time. So we were able to borrow Tamura. So that was kind of an amazing Easter egg to be able to get in the show.
Yeah, I love that. I'm gonna ask you one more question, sure. But like, really, what was it like to just bring everybody back together for this moment? Because, like, you know, you had Ewan, you had Hayden, you had Jimmy Smits right at the beginning, and yeah.
It was pretty special. Like, I'm not sure I'll ever work on anything that, you know, I mean, how many projects have actors that did roles 20 years ago in a huge, you know, in huge roles, and then also have lived with these characters in their personal lives, you know, where it's like they can't go out without people in the car next to them saying Obi-Wan or, you know, Vader next to them. So there was something special. And I think also they have their own relationships. Like, Ewan and Hayden have a personal relationship, and, you know, and people like Bonnie and Joel, who hadn't seen each other in years, and they were like, I think they were like 19 when they did the originals. So it was meaningful to, I think, all those actors who returned on so many levels. And then also the crew, and this was the same with Mandalorian, is I've never worked on a show, and particularly with Obi-Wan, there was just so much love where they care about the material because the material means something to them personally. You know, they care about Obi-Wan and Vader. Like, so it doesn't matter if I'm there or not. It's really like, this is something that means something to them in their own lives. So it was a very special show to work on, just in the fact that, like, I've never come to work and had everybody so invested and so emotional.
Deborah, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your insight into Obi-Wan Kenobi, which is now streaming on Disney+. Thank you to our friends at Disney+ and to Lucasfilm. And of course, Deborah, thank you so much for joining us today.